This year marks the 100th year anniversary for World War I, and Britain has come together to honour those past and present in the armed forces. However, what happens to those in the Army, Navy and RAF once they rejoin civilian life? During World War I, Britain followed many of its European counterparts' leads and enforced conscription. 100 years later, and the debt we owe to our soldiers lives on.
And the recent images of the 70th anniversary of the D-Day landings and the forthcoming commemoration of the centenary of the First World War remind us of the huge debt we owe to our veterans. But all ex-service personnel are veterans, whatever their age or length of service. And we are very proud that most of those leaving the forces go on to make a valuable contribution back in civilian life from the society where they came.
While it led to millions of deaths by the end of the war, it also led to hundreds of thousands who were finding it hard to gain employment in civilian life.
All service personnel that served in the armed forces during the First World War that were injured would receive some form of pension after the war. By today's comparisons, it wasn't a great deal, but it was something, and it was something that was more than had been previously the case in Britain. In terms of employment, after they'd left the armed forces, one of the things actually of demobilisation, it was quite a long process. So whilst there was an armistice on the Western Front in November 1918, it often wasn't until a full calendar year later that many men were actually demobilised and released from the armed forces back into civilian life. So it was quite a slow and sometimes frustrating process. If a soldier had a previous job and could get their employer to write a letter and show that they were a key worker and essential for the working of that company, then sometimes they could be demobilised a little bit quicker. So those that had good solid jobs before the war sometimes were able to return to them, and companies were encouraged to accept their former employees. But there were problems in terms of obviously soldiers that came back from the war that suffered injuries, disabilities and so on and so forth. There was quite an active campaign in terms of posters and so on to encourage employers not to turn away disabled service personnel, to employ everybody in it, and also appreciate the new skill sets that a lot of people had from being in the armed forces or from doing munitions work or whatever it was that they'd been involved in during the First World War.
Fast forward 100 years and the landscape for ex-forces personnel has radically changed.
I left the military in 1994, so I would say that the military has come on leaps and bounds in terms of preparing military personnel for civilian life and making sure they have the right skills, they develop the right networks to make the most of what they've learned in their military careers. However, I would say that working inside the military, the focus and attention to detail when it comes to training and learning new skills and developing those skills at a general level as a member of the military is actually a really important and useful skill to have, being able to absorb different disciplines and then be able to apply them very quickly in a business context.
Ex-armed forces personnel are now taking over financial services and the IT sector, as those in the Army, Navy and RAF have garnered skills that are either unique or ingrained from serving in the military.
The top attributes I believe that an ex-soldier can offer the business world: discipline, unselfishness, cheerfulness under adversity, the ability to succeed in any task given. All of these things are very, very key attributes and drummed into you as a soldier.
The first one, I think the most important, from my personal experience, is the impact that good leadership has on any organisation. The second part is about making sure whoever is within your organisation, giving them the right context so that they can act independently and free from organisational constraint when it comes to moving a project forward. I think that's really important. So the ability to act independently is important. And I think the third thing, and something I've certainly learned in my experience as an officer, is not to be fearful of surrounding yourself with incredibly gifted and talented people. I certainly see, my experience in business has been, some people do tend to look at others and see, is this person a threat to me personally or not? And I say, look beyond that and actually engage with the best individuals you possibly can in your organisation and utilise their skills.
With the UK's Ministry of Defence shedding 20,000 jobs by 2020 as it aims to plug a £38 billion black hole in its budget, it looks like many will have the option to go into white-collar work. Companies such as Lighthouse Group and Bishopsgate Financial have carved new training programmes that are specifically designed in reaping the talent from the armed forces and putting them into project management work.
When they first come into us, we've actually put together an 8-week training program which actually gives them the basics of financial services, some of which they will have already, but we actually supplement their existing knowledge. And also, because we're going to channel them initially into project management, we give them project management training and training in project office activities. And from then they go into our project teams to be deployed on client sites. But during the course of the next 2 years, we're going to continue to invest in their training, depending on what the individual needs, because they all come out with different skills from their background in the services. I think that the main thing that people need to be comfortable with is that more and more people are changing careers more and more throughout the time of their career, and whereas people used to go into a job for life, that just isn't the case anymore. And people are always retraining. The services give the people coming out of the services a good retraining budget that they can apply to learn new skills themselves. And I think if they can find an organisation like ours which is providing a targeted entry program for them, that's absolutely perfect for them.
So what do they also add to the sales force?
Resourcefulness. All good soldiers are resourceful. You know, it could be making your way across a load of terrain and making the most out of that terrain to give you cover, protect you from people trying to kill you, or it could be in a survival situation, you know, getting clean water and food to sustain life. You have to learn how to make use of surroundings and be resourceful. For example, I've worked with sales teams and businesses all over the world, and often they suffer from the global problem of really not having enough new clients to speak to. And upon inspection of their resources and their databases and their contact lists, they're often loaded with opportunities, but they're just not attuned and trained to actually see the opportunities. A good soldier is resourceful. They can apply that to the business world. So often in life and in business, there's not a lack of resources, there's simply a lack of resourcefulness.
Indeed, those who have made the transition have shown that learning skills in seemingly niche fields such as ammunition or flying helicopters like Farrington have shown it can be applied to civilian life.
A lot of military skills and trades are actually directly transferable into a civilian equivalent. So don't get me wrong in terms of taking what you know and applying it in a civilian context, but also don't be constrained by that, because as I say, what I've found in business is that people really value the skills that you learn in terms of working within a multi-skilled organisation, being able to plan either ahead of time or on the fly as being really important skills to bring into a business environment.
But what are the challenges that face ex-armed forces staff? Experts say there are industry issues as well as personal confidence over what they could offer in white-collar work.
When I first left the Royal Marines, I went down the same route as a lot of people would go, and you're thinking security, fire service, police. I ended up becoming a full-time firefighter. And really for me, it just wasn't quite a fit, because it was never going to be the Royal Marines. So I would suggest just opening your mind and just being a bit contrarian about that approach, and understanding that a lot of the things that you've learned, a lot of the self-discipline, a lot of the determination, the courage, the tenacity can absolutely be applied to the business world and add value to business's bottom line almost from the get-go.
I think one of the problems we've got in the industry is that there's a lot of standard conventions in the way people do their recruitment. So most trainee schemes and entry schemes are based around the graduate population. We can't compete, frankly, with the big four consultancies or the big companies who are offering graduate training courses. But very rarely do they offer an entry program that's fit for someone who's got experience but just in the wrong field. So that's why we've targeted them, and by supplementing their skills with our training program, it means that they actually like coming in to work for us, because they're not just being classified as people coming out of the university.
So what's next for the ex-armed forces staff? One thing is for sure, they will be able to forge a new career in some of the country's most lucrative industries.